everybody. I'm Beverley Wang. It's my pleasure and honor to serve as your MC tonight. Welcome to the State Library Victoria for this very special event, Dangerous Ideas, The Right to Read Freely, featuring writer, librarian, and public scholar Tracie D. Hall. Yes, let's applaud. First and foremost, please welcome Wurundjeri man Colin Hunter Jr., who will give a welcome to country.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. It is my honour and privilege to be here tonight. My name is Colin Hunter IV. I would like to start off with acknowledging that this evening we are on Wurundjeri country, home of my ancestors and also home to everybody here today. I would also like to pay my respects to both elders past, present and emerging, elders from all nations, especially all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander community members here this evening. Wurundjeri is a part of the Kulin Nation and of the Warong language group. Wurundjeri country extends from the inner city of Melbourne, across to the Great Dividing Range, west to the Werribee River, south to the Mordialloc Creek and east to Mount Baw. A big thank you to everybody who has helped make this event possible this evening. Wominjeka, welcome, and hopefully everyone enjoys the rest of their afternoon. Thank you very much and enjoy.
Thank you so much, Colin. And on behalf of State Library Victoria, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional lands of all the Victorian Aboriginal clans and their cultural practices and knowledge systems. And to everyone gathered here in this beautiful space, and to everyone watching on the live stream, welcome to For Future Reference. For Future Reference is an annual lecture series that shines a light on women's influence on society via the mediums of literature, storytelling, and authorship, both historically and into the future, with a focus on the future archives to be held in the state collection. It's endowed by the Helen Macpherson Smith Trust and supported by the library's Women Writers Fund initiative, which seeks to redress the historical gender imbalance in State Library Victoria's collection by acquiring works that highlight work by underrepresented women and non-binary writers, artists, and thinkers. It's critically important work, and I'd like to welcome and give special acknowledgement to some VIPs who are with us tonight. U.S. Consul General Kathleen Lively, members of the Helen Macpherson Smith Trust who are joining us tonight, as well as the State Library Victoria Board and Library Executive. Let's give everybody a round of applause. Yes. All right. Now, I have a feeling that there is a strong contingent of librarians and library-associated people in the audience tonight. Can I get a show of hands? I think you all deserve a round of applause as well. Thank you for your work, because, libraries, I don't have to tell you, you work here, you work there, and we're in one. They are the beating heart of civil society and the unofficial safety net of social cohesion. And I say this with lived experience because I'm one of many children, specifically hailing from the lightly supervised child of time-poor immigrants variety, who, out of necessity, was frequently delivered to the local library for basically free babysitting, okay? And there was something about that setting of being in the library, filled with books you could borrow for free. How could anything go wrong in a space like that? So my parents, I think they thought that was a character reference. Only good things can happen here, right? You're surrounded by free books and knowledge, all right? It was also the 1980s. Standards for child supervision were very different. This is a fact established by the Netflix series Stranger Things. But you know what? It was during what felt like many, many, many hours after school, between activities and during school ideas, where I exercised my right to read freely. Now, that freedom may have involved me stealthily reading all of the horny bits in the carousel of paperback romance novels. But reading is reading, right, Tracie? Yes. Right? I mean, I also read the Garfield anthologies, so my reading tastes were vast and wide-ranging, okay? Look at me now, it's fine. But these times spent in public libraries were so valuable to me. They opened up a world of stories, writing, and ideas, and that later evolved into gathering in libraries like this as a university student, studying and actually just marveling that so many words had been laid onto pages for us all to read. Libraries play such a huge role in opening up horizons, especially for underserved communities. You open a book and you watch where it leads. So on behalf of all the curious and horny latchkey kids of the world, I want to thank librarians and library workers for keeping an eye on us over the years and never judging us. Thank you very much to libraries, okay? Now, just a little bit of housekeeping before I hand the stage over to the wonderful and impressive Tracie D Hall, who is the main event that you have all very intelligently gathered here for tonight. You are in for a treat. Housekeeping notes. This event is being Auslan interpreted, and a big thank you and acknowledgement to our interpreters, Nicole and Leah, who are here tonight. Yes, absolutely. Following Tracie's address, there will be a brief audience Q&A. So if you'd like to ask a question, you can submit it via Slido. You just scan the QR code, which is available, I am sure, on the screen. It will be shared. And you can send in your question. Please don't be shy. We love questions. If you're joining via the live stream, you can also submit questions via Slido. All you have to do is enter your question into the question box on your screen. And just a note, you can also enable captions on the live stream by clicking the CC or closed captioning button. If you'd like to get it for refreshments during the event, there is a bar in the back right corner of this room. It will remain open. Toilets are to your right. And please switch your phones to silent if you haven't already. Okay, now, it is now my great privilege to introduce you to Tracie D Hall. Tracie is a poet, an advocate, a trailblazer, and a defender of intellectual freedom and the right to read freely. Tracie is the former executive director of the American Library Association, the oldest and largest library association in the world. Now, when she took on that role in early 2020, she became the first Black woman executive director of the ALA in the organization's 150-year history. They took their time, but they got there. And what a time to lead the organization in an era of rising challenges to books and book banning in the United States. Do not applaud for that, okay? Prior to her tenure at the ALA, Tracie served as Culture Program Director at the Joyce Foundation, Deputy Commissioner of Chicago's Department of Cultural Affairs and Special Events, Vice President of Strategy and Organizational Development at Queens Library, Community Investment Strategist for the Boeing Company's Global Corporate Citizenship Division, and Assistant Dean of Dominican University's Graduate School of Library and Information Science. I have to take a breath. Her CV is so impressive. Tracie is a committed advocate for early and adult literacy, broadband access, and library and educational services for the incarcerated. Her career in library and arts administration so far has been recognized with the National Book Foundation Lifetime Achievement Award. In September, Tracie was honored with the Medal for Freedom of Speech and Free Expression by the Franklin D. Roosevelt Institute. And Tracie is also one of Time Magazine's 100 most influential people of 2023. And Min Jin Lee wrote Tracie's introduction for the magazine, and Min Jin Lee wrote, "Hall's life's work teaches each of us that the love of libraries and books can free us from hatred and lies, not just for the present generation, but for the liberation of all to come." Tonight, Tracie will speak to us about why books, libraries, and the very act of reading have come under scrutiny in this current socio-political moment, and how what is happening now connects to other attempts to limit reading and information access across the history. So please join me in giving a very enthusiastic welcome to Tracie D Hall.
Wow. I am really, really moved to be here. I have to tell you that my esteem for this library, the State Library of Victoria, and I have been in a lot of libraries, but my esteem for this particular library and for its ambition and vision cannot be higher. And I'm so grateful to have each of you here for this conversation, a conversation that is so necessary and that would be impossible without your presence. So I'm looking forward to sharing some ideas, but I'm also looking forward to your questions, and certainly I'm looking forward to being in conversation with the amazing Beverley Wang. But before I begin, I want to bow to Aboriginal wisdom, to the wisdom that has sustained this land, and to wisdom that will keep us in and through these times. I want to extend my deepest gratitude to the State Library of Victoria's extraordinary staff. Each and every one of them has exhibited a kind of care and investment, not only in this conversation, but ensuring that I had some basis, some foundation for the words that I will share here today. I am incredibly grateful, and I really, really admire the tenacity and the vision. I believe this library to be an extraordinary resource, and I cannot wait to tell the world what I have seen here during my time. Moments like this can and should be an opportunity to think about the future. In the few days that I have been here, I've had the opportunity to take a closer look at this library's holdings, which are phenomenal. I just saw some things today that I had never seen before, redactions in volumes from the 1500s. I am impressed by the exhibitions. I don't know how many of you have seen Mirror, which is incredible, which is something that I would expect to see at some of the greatest museums in the world. I am so impressed and still in awe of Walter Kadiki's poem, spoken in Australian Sign Language with no subtitles. I've been impressed by the partnerships that are being fostered, and I'm excited to hear about future plans, groundbreaking work and exhibitions that will open even this weekend and next week. I must say that the ambition that the State Library Administration holds for this institution and for the communities it serves really grounds my presentation today and gives it a greater level of urgency. Because, as we will hear, efforts to censor books in the US, in the UK, and across the world are being closely followed by efforts to defund and to remove libraries from the public realm. So for someone who fervently believes in the founding principles of the modern library, that is, to provide information access to all, it is an honor and perhaps an imperative to be here tonight. We are, as a global society, facing what the great Congressman John Lewis, a protege of Dr. Martin Luther King predicted would be the paramount civil rights issue of our time. The right to unfiltered information access and the unmoderated right to read. That freedom, which is foundational to the Bill of Rights in the U.S. as enshrined in the First Amendment, as well as in Article 19 of the United Nations 1948 Universal Declaration of Human Rights, to which Australia is an original signatory, reads, everyone, and I'm quoting here, has the right to freedom of opinion and expression. This right includes freedom to hold opinions without interference and to seek, receive, and impart information and ideas through any media and regardless of frontier or platform. So how did we get from these national declarations of protection for information access to where we are today? Here in Australia, the forced removal by a national retailer of a sex education book for teens that seeks to educate youth about the corresponding physiological and psychological changes they may experience during adolescence and the importance of understanding sexual consent. And in the US, to a moment in our political evolution when 46 out of 50 states, all but 4 states, have had legislation put in place that seeks to limit or circumscribe the right to read. This in a country that was literally founded on First Amendment principles. Tonight, I wish to argue that censorship has risen, not just in the US, not just in Australia, but in republics all over the world, from China to Turkey. Because consciously or unconsciously, we have surrendered or sublimated our paramount social responsibility as citizens and residents, that of ongoing civic engagement of a kind that demands and advances democracy and governance of, by, and for the people. I also want to argue quite soberly that when we begin to see widespread and increasingly state-sanctioned censorship and moratoriums on speech, the press, science, data, and yes, literature as aggregators and vehicles of information, and when we see widespread disinvestment in public schools and universities, journalism, and libraries as the institutions created as guarantors of equitable access to information, we begin to move knowingly or unknowingly towards a dark age. The rise of censorship in the modern republic, how the right to read became the civil rights issue of our time. I walked into this library, into one of the great reading rooms in this space, and the very first thing I saw, the very first inscription on the wall was this: The word is the making of the world. Wallace Stevens. So I feel a certain amount of gravity. I have my marching orders, as reminded by Wallace Stevens, that the word is the making of the world. If so, then the erasure or the removal of the word is what? Is what? The unmaking of the world. I want you to hold that. I want you to hold that. We are at a point in our social evolution where the three most critical quality of life indicators, which are access to education, access to employment, and access to public health, all rely on sophisticated information finding, navigation, and comprehension skills. Literally, if you cannot find, access, interpret, or apply that information to your life, your lifetime outcomes will be less than your peers with more sophisticated skills. Literacy, access levels, social networks, digital access. We are, after all, in the information age. If information has become more ubiquitous, more necessary, more urgent, how in the course of a few generations have we devolved from a fervent belief in information and reading access as foundational to societal progress? And I'm sharing here First Amendment, sharing here Article 19 from the Declaration of Human Rights. How have we moved from there to a period where state-sanctioned censorship has become rampant, and I'm going to argue here, even normalized? And the screen is only so big, so I could only fit just a few headlines, but I want to share one of them. Of course, here we are looking at the record-breaking exponential rise of censorship in the US. But we're also looking at what's happening right here in this country. And I'm so happy to see so many librarians and so many of you who love the written word, who depend on the written word, who love libraries, and who understand libraries to be essential to our democracy here today. But I'm really happy just to see you here. Because this type of public space, these types of lectures are how we create the world, by sharing words, by talking about this conversation in this room today, but also when we go home, by sharing what we heard, by listening and understanding what resonates, by pushing back against that doesn't, by refining our argument, and by leaving with the understanding that censorship is on the rise and we have something to do about it or consequences to pay if we don't. But of course, we also see censorship rising in Poland, in the UK, which has now, in the aftermath of Brexit, lost 25% of its public libraries. 1 out of every 4 public libraries was lost in the UK. Libraries that offered, as many libraries in Australia do, as many libraries in the US do, not only books, but educational programs, literacy programs, family literacy programs, educational programs for people who were early school leavers, programs on employment, arts access, 25%. And now we see that UK librarians are also experiencing unprecedented censorship attempts. And here in Canada, I just wanted to share something that has happened most recently. And this is the Peel District School Board, which recently found itself in such a controversy and such a fight over censorship that the decision was summarily made to just remove books written before 2008. Instances of state-sanctioned censorship are also happening in other countries as well, and these are just a few. In librarianship, we've learned that to list is to limit here. And even though I've been recently to a couple of countries that are also fighting the fight of censorship, these are some of the more well-documented instances of contemporary censorship happening in the last 2 to 3 years. But what we see happening is not just restriction to books, but also the inclusion of certain topics in students' coursework. Some examples, again, from Brazil and even recently in Arkansas, Little Rock, Arkansas, known for one of the famous school desegregation courses. The same school district has now said that books on African American history as well as African American history coursework will be denied across the state as part of the formal curriculum. And I'm happy to see the city of Little Rock actually pushing back. But we're getting to the point now where censorship is increasingly not only state sanctioned, but pervasive, widespread, wide-ranging. One of the questions that I have as I've been following and tracking and seeking to map contemporary censorship instances is censorship becoming one of the most viable exports between countries, certainly in states? And if so, what is our responsibility to arrest it, lest it continue to calcify? I'm here today because good people in Australia believe that censorship is a violation of our personal freedoms and human rights. If it continues to proliferate at this rate, there will be a time when there is a community or even a generation that sees it as normal, that expects it. In the US, I am sad to say that censorship is not only at an all-time high, but we are finding the grounds for censorship now to become a lot more dubious and open and uncertain. Most recently, the book The Hill We Climb by the young inaugural poet Amanda Gorman, who wrote this poem right in the throes of the pandemic, right after the George Floyd murder, who wrote it for the occasion of President Biden's inauguration, a poem that talks about the ongoing work of democracy and how we, no matter where we come from, no matter our background, immigrant background, no matter our level of education or neighborhood, that we must participate and co-create democracy one day at a time. That book was actually restricted in the state of Florida. And when the entire country put its shoulders up and said, that book? Why? Governor DeSantis began to backpedal and say, no, we're not censoring it. We're just restricting it, meaning that grade school students will just have to ask to read it. Censorship in the US is proliferating at a rate that eludes any logic. Here are just more headlines. The proliferation of censorship, what's being censored, where we will take a closer look. But also understanding that censorship, especially of books that are widely considered to be canonical, great works of literature, that as they are being removed from library bookshelves and from bookstores, increasingly young people who are testing into college are not able to access those books and to be prepared at the same rate of their peers in other locations. So let's look at what topics are being banned. Here you can see that neck and neck, books that are by and about the LGBTQIA experience, by and about BIPOC experiences are being banned, as are books about civil rights, books that have any type of sexual content, books that might contain some profanity. But I am sharing this because what we are finding is that these topics are not holding up. They're not holding up when we are actually at the hearings and hearing the people who are bringing these forward. Sometimes have very, very, very just maybe peripheral understanding of the book. Many have not read the book in its entirety. Some have not read the book at all. I've gone to hearing after hearing after hearing where someone stands up and says, well, I haven't read the book, but I did get a copy of a few of the passages it contains, and on those grounds alone, I object to it being available in our schools. I haven't read the book. Here are some of the books that are frequently being challenged in the US, and I just wanted to share a few of them with you. Of course, we celebrated the film Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret, written by Judy Blume, which was censored immediately when it came out on the grounds that it talked frankly about menstruation, that is still seen as problematic. But also because the main character, the protagonist, Margaret, is vacillating between making choices between following her father or mother with their Jewish or Christian identity. And the fact that she doesn't come out right away and say, well, of course I should choose Christianity, was one of the grounds that it was banned on. The idea that religious ideation and where it was landing was somehow dangerous and would mislead children, especially Christian children. A more recent book, Go With the Flow, again, banned because it talks frankly about menstruation. Ruby Bridges Goes to School because it is a story, it is the memoir of a young woman who is one of the main actors in one of the paramount school desegregation trials in the US. That book is still being banned and censored just on the grounds that it talks about, and some consider it to be a primer for civil rights activism. And finally, All Boys Aren't Blue, which is now becoming, I think it is on course to probably be the second most banned book in US history, because George M. Johnson talks frankly about his experience of being molested at 10 years old and how he decided to be a survivor. That book has been bound on grounds that it is pornographic. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. As I've said, book censorship in the US is becoming more of a norm than an exception, more of a standard. And of course, when we talk about book banning, we are talking about a world that includes books just being challenged, books being restricted, and books being banned or removed altogether. So censorship has taken many textures, which is really, really dangerous, because now there can just be a chilling effect around a book that would cause it not to be available in a school or public library just because it's been challenged. And that challenge can come from just one individual. So I want to talk more deeply, perhaps, about the types of charges that are propagating book banning. Most of the challenges that we see are coming because many are saying, well, this book isn't age appropriate. And I'd like to debunk that, because most of the books that are being challenged, especially books that are being challenged because they are not appropriate for young people, feature a protagonist who is at the age of the intended audience. So these aren't books written by a 58-year-old man or woman for 12-year-olds. These are books in which the main character is 10 or 12, or memoirs of somebody who is recalling being 16 for an audience that is of that same age. So when we think about age appropriate, when we think about the screening that needs to happen in book selection, we can debunk that challenge. That is not age appropriate. We can also debunk the fact that many books are being said to be pornographic. And what we know about the definition for pornography is that it is sexual content intended to arouse. And we know that books on sexual harassment or on rape or on molestation are not intended to sexually arouse. And finally, books that are increasingly being challenged because they talk about or depict unflattering or unsettling histories. And we know that most Americans, when polled, have said that they do not believe that a book should be banned because it talks about a period in U.S. history in which maybe a community was wrong or a community did wrong. So if these are the charges that are propagating book banning, and if we can begin to debunk them, where are they coming from? And why are they so pervasive? Let's look at where they're coming from. Here's a heat map. And unfortunately, there are very few places that there has not been a challenge at all. But there are certain places where we are bound to see challenges, and we know that Florida and Texas are leading. And we also know that even theories like critical race theory has been called out repeatedly. And we know, again, that censorship, and I'll get to that in a minute, capitalizes on disinformation. So in the early days of censorship in the US, when we were really seeing a lot of attacks on books about civil rights or race, they were called critical race theory, which in many cases is usually a theory that you encounter sometimes only in graduate school. So we're being told that first and third and fifth graders are engaged in critical race theory. Would it be that they were, right? They could use it now. But we are also seeing this come from and being lobbied at or lodged at the grassroots level, when in fact this is not a grassroots campaign. Let's get closely into that. I want to really talk about the fact that censorship is targeting the grassroots level of communities, but it's not coming from the grassroots. Now, I could really do a whole side conversation specifically about Moms for Liberty. And I could talk a lot about Moms for Liberty, especially today, because we are seeing the splintering of Moms for Liberty groups because the husband of one of the co-founders has just been brought up on rape allegations. But what we see is that despite the dubious foundation of Moms for Liberty, they continue to hold sway. Today, they are considered to be kingmakers for aspiring conservative politicians. And here you see a recent headline of someone from Moms for Liberty calling police over a book they found in the library. I just want to show you who the founders of Moms for Liberty are, and of course, what we see here is that they've only been around for about 2 years. And it is Bridget Ziegler, who is in the teal here, who is one of the co-founders and also the wife of Florida Republican Party Chairman Christian Ziegler. And I also want to say that before this group was founded, none of these women was active in literary or library space at all. So when we talk about the fact that we are beginning to see book banning happening all over the world, but we're also beginning to see the same groups associated with it, we have to ask ourselves some questions about the political foundation or perhaps even the political goals or intentions of a group like Moms for Liberty. And there are others and other spinoffs. But I wanted to ask this question just for us to think about for our larger conversation. In the midst of an info glut, when I have seen and you have seen, and maybe we've all done this, when, to quiet or to occupy a toddler, we're willing to give a tablet or a cell phone and let that babysit them for hours. Why have we focused so summarily on books? What is it about the book, about literature, about story that is so scary? I talked to someone about this and they said, we've gotten to a point where instead of evidence-based information, we are beginning to show a preference for propaganda. And I wanted to share this from the Washington Post that corroborates once again that most Americans believe in the right to read. Then why? How did we get here? And why this focus on the book? Why in 2023, how have books become contraband? Again, I will argue that censorship is not deeply partisan, although some would try to argue and pit political parties against each other. Yet, it is something that will last as long as we permit it. And again, and I'm hoping you're reading down poll after poll, survey after survey that reveal how people feel about access to books. Democrats and independents, and I'm reading the last bullet, were even more opposed to book bans. About 85% of Democrats said they oppose bans from school boards and lawmakers, and about 2/3 or 66% of independents said the same. Ray Bradbury said something that is extremely prescient at this moment. At a time where we are seeing an unprecedented chilling effect around the act of reading. He said, you don't have to burn books to destroy a culture. Just get people to stop reading them. Censorship is not happening in a silo. It is a Trojan horse that is intended to make the violation of foundational human rights seem like a protective measure. And again, just headlines, my clippings, I call them, that are growing and growing and growing. I need a separate zip file now. I used to just store them in a file on my computer. But again, amid book bans and censorship attempts, we are seeing in the US the rising of legislation that would remove funding for libraries entirely. In Missouri, on March 28th, 2023, in the morning, as I prepared for a meeting at the American Library Association, I saw something that I thought I would never live to see in my lifetime. A state, one of the last states that upheld the Black Code law to restrict reading for enslaved Africans, that very state, March 28th, moved to strip public library funding across the state if libraries did not remove books that they considered to be obscene or to contain information around LGBTQIA or BIPOC histories, something I never thought I would live to see. And it still hasn't been restored. Is the clampdown on books and libraries by conservative politicians and interest groups happenstance, or is it calculated? And here's some things that I just want us to think about. Why libraries and why books? One of the things that I think a lot about is that we have evidence and growing bodies of research that tell us that the millennial generation, Generation Y and Z, if they continue their usership habits, will be the generation that will use public libraries the most. The fear of the book, the fear of the repository of books. And we also know that LGBTQIA, BIPOC, and young people who are interested in social justice tend to vote in a way that cannot be predicted, not just for party, but for cause. And so what we are seeing is really a battleground that seeks to delegitimize entire communities and to delegitimize or discredit voters from those communities and to persuade others. I'd love to hear your ideas. But when have we seen such widespread censorship before? In 1650, we saw the censorship and the burning of a religious text in the US that argued that just by being good, you could go to heaven. People objected to that and said, no, there are more machinations necessary than that. But this book in Massachusetts was banned quite widely and burned. Later, from 1740 to the late 1800s, we would see the rise of the Black Code laws that saw reading or literacy or access to books as being problematic and a threat to enslavement, to African enslavement. And these are just some of the laws. And I bring up Missouri again because Missouri also was one of the regions, one of the states that enacted some of the most heinous laws against literacy or the act of reading for enslaved Africans. And we're talking about corporal punishment as well that included the cutting off of fingers and sometimes the gouging out of eyes as well as lashes. And we also know that in the Black Code laws, teaching an enslaved African to read, a white person found teaching an enslaved African to read would not only face jail time and fines, but also one of the few instances under these codes or laws in which the white person would also be met with corporal punishment. Here's an example from 1831 from North Carolina. Probably the most recent instance of widespread and state-sanctioned censorship in the US was the Joseph McCarthy era, which lasted from 1947 until his death, almost 10 years. He banned books like Civil Disobedience by Henry David Thoreau, which then was becoming an early primer for the civil rights movement. Books like John Steinbeck's Grapes of Wrath, because it brought nobility to workers. Howard Pyle's Robin Hood, because it castigated wealth hoarding and celebrated wealth distribution. And also multiple works by W.B. Du Bois and Langston Hughes, who wrote frankly about Black life, Black promise, and Black excellence. But even as early as 1867, we see some wrangling about literacy, the right to read, and access to books. A writer writing for Harper's Weekly in 1867 observed, "The alphabet is an abolitionist. If you would keep a people enslaved, refuse to teach them to read." Yesterday, I'm going to try not to cry because sometimes the parallels are so stark. Visiting the Aboriginal History Archive, and some of our colleagues are there, please raise your hands. And I know it's hard because I'm holding back. And I have to honor the State Library of Victoria because the one thing I asked is, there's something that I want to see, there's people that I want to hear from. But this moment can't even describe it. One of our dear colleagues pushed this book towards me and said, "I think this book is really important." And as we continued to talk, the librarian and me said, when somebody says that, you really have to take a moment. And I just want you to read. This book is also speaking about educational policy for Aboriginal children and their families, and makes the case that administrators must be deliberate with educational policy, because once a community, once children become informed, once they become literate, they can never go back. There are so many parallels between what is happening now in the US and where policy is headed in other nations. But there are incredible parallels between the US and Australia. Parallels that go way back, that are dyed deep in the fabric of both nations. So before I sit down and begin in this uplifting conversation, we really have a lot to talk about with Beverley. I also wanted to talk a little bit and place censorship in the context of a larger continuum of information malpractice. We used to be very concerned with misinformation, which is just wrong information. A lot of times in journalism, we spend a lot of time not just fact-checking, but correcting things that have been wrong. Those were the good old days. We are now summarily in a place where disinformation, the intentional effort or design to misinform towards a particular goal or a purpose, is a norm. And we see that everywhere. We are also in a place where there are communities that are experiencing deep information poverty. They just don't have access to useful information, to factual information, or information that is resonant, or information that they can interpret and apply to their lives. We also have information disparity, where everybody else has the pertinent and needful information, but you all don't. And then with information redlining, we cement that. We continue to invest in information services and infrastructure here, but not for you. That is something that we call information redlining. And then we have information exclusion, where you just don't get the information, even if it is about you. And we see that happening too often, not just in jails and prisons where it has become normalized, but also in hospitals, where there are records and records and records about you that you don't get, that you might have to ask for, that you are excluded from, and that were not even designed, even though it is you and your body, not even designed for you or for your edification identification or use. And then we get to information withdrawal, where we take information that was in the public realm and we remove it for a purpose or towards a goal. And that is called censorship. I've written a lot about information redlining, and I never talk about censorship without talking about information redlining, because we sometimes can be unwittingly aiding and abetting a certain type of censorship. Or a certain type of limitation on access when we believe that the wealthier or certain neighborhoods or people who are educated in a particular way are worthy or should have a level of information, but others don't have that right. And so I definitely want to make sure that I don't leave here today without holding us accountable for the degree to which we might be also enacting information malpractice. So there's an enduring connection between censorship and socio-political disenfranchisement. I've talked a lot about that. But it also includes a normalization of low literacy in certain populations in the US. I want to just say this, that whereas previous generations in the US have been preoccupied with the separation of church and state, as we've seen, I believe that there's reason to be vigilant also about the separation of text and state, about imagination state and memory or state. And I'm going to get to talk about artificial intelligence. And this is kind of coming up as a non sequitur because I intended to be disruptive, because I do think that we are facing the civil rights issue of our time. But I also want to say that just as we are seeing a chilling effect on the right to read, we are also seeing the rise once again in all industrialized nations of a rising number of people who can't read or who don't read at all. And we have many studies that are telling us that we're not reading in the US in the ways in which we used to, and that we also have people who can't read. And we know that we have people who are working and whose labor is predicated sometimes on the fact that they will accept jobs because they don't have a level of education or literacy that would allow them to push back, ask for higher wages or better working conditions. And we also have whole groups of people who are not online at all, who can't and don't participate in digital space. We also, with 43 million Americans in the US who are not able to read past a 5th grade level, we also see whole areas of policy which are really built on low levels of literacy. And we see the connection between low literacy, censorship, and over incarceration. In the US, almost 3 out of every 100 people has had some carceral contact, meaning that they have been in jail or prison. 3 out of 100, 43 million people in the US who can't read, and the rise of censorship. Are you beginning to see a trifecta? Are you beginning to see a 3-legged stool? Here are just some of the places in which we have a heat map again with the lowest levels of literacy. If this looks familiar, I can go back and show you also where censorship is happening. But because we have so many parallels, one of the briefing documents that I received my first day in Australia was looking at the adult and child literacy rates here. And when I had the opportunity, I didn't do that here, although I should have, I placed them side by side, our literacy rates in the US. So I want everything that I'm saying and everything that I've said right before this moment to serve for each of you as a cautionary tale. I'm getting ready to end here, but I needed to say this. We are a nation in the US that is circumscribing reading. We are a nation in the US that is not reading. We are a nation in the US where we are losing the ability to read. And we are a nation in the US and anywhere that is reading on the internet, that we have profoundly changed the way that we read. The internet has changed the way that we read. Usually in most cultures, it's left to right or right to left. We now read top to bottom, usually ignoring everything in the middle. What is this about? How does it end? And we're moving more and more into a place where that's okay. Something called skim reading. So I wanted to bring this up because when we don't read or can't read, we are more susceptible to disinformation and less likely to care about or notice information withdrawal. And I want to argue here, as someone who has also studied reading for almost 3 decades, that we are moving into a place where how we even access and internalize information will make disinformation and censorship more common. So I want to end with artificial intelligence. And of course, as a librarian, I am really interested and invested in any technology that will accelerate the time from just information to that moment when information becomes knowledge. So I'm always invested in any accelerator. But one of the things that we have to think about, and the reason why I have italicized intelligence, is because I have a problem with that term. Because intelligence knows when to stop itself. Intelligence obeys or understands limits, even if it overrides them. With fast information aggregation, we don't have any idea, and from what I have seen, I don't see yet signs of intelligence. So I want to problematize that notion because I think that intelligence is sort of values driven, and it also sometimes tells us that when we don't have a diversity of thought, that we have groups that just assigned this notion of intelligence to something that is anything but. So that's my diatribe on artificial intelligence. But it is a fast information aggregator. And one of the things that we know is that AI has allowed governments to enhance and refine online censorship. Legal frameworks in at least 21 countries mandate or incentivize digital platforms to deploy machine learning to remove disfavored political, social, and religious speech. So as I sit down to talk with Beverley, I want to call out artificial intelligence because I believe, I always ask myself this question, can the internet be an abolitionist? And I believe that we are going to have to ask that question sooner rather than later. Because if anything I said has frightened you, AI can enact and can aggregate information and censor it much faster than we've ever seen before. So I would love to invite the great Beverley Wang up to talk further about the right to read, a right that I don't believe we can afford to lose. Thank you.
Tracie, thank you. That was incredible. Really. Wow. Okay, well, lots to talk about. I want to start with a question that you threw out to us in the audience. And it's a fascinating one because, as you point out, we do have unfettered access to anything on the internet. Yet there's this hyper-focus on books, the printed and bound book. Why do you think that is?
I'm still trying to work that out. You know, I actually was at ABC today talking with one of the hosts, and she asked me that question, and I said, we need to linger there. I mean, I definitely think there's something dialogical. There's something, I think, about the book in which, even though, you know, the book is written and the author, is rarely, if ever, present. There is a way in which there is still some type of exchange, right? A taking in, a pondering, and applying in a way that might be different than maybe a game online. I mean, even if it is interactive, there's something, I think, about the nature of a book that invites expansion and ideation. And I think that there's like there's a lot of fear of reading, right? I mean, there's still the assignment, I think, of the act of reading to the erudite and to a particular class, right? And I think that to the degree that continues to happen, there is this fear that books are going to make me accountable, that a certain level of knowledge is going to require not only insight or action, that I'll have to study something before I act. And I think that for some people that's intimidating. And I think for people who just want to wield power that isn't always evidence informed, it is a threat. And unfortunately, I think we're seeing that fear of reading take hold and really inspire people towards legislation that I don't think we ever thought we would see.
You articulated and went through different timelines, different eras of history where book banning and censorship was also on the rise. For this particular era that we find ourselves in, how do you think we got here?
Yeah, definitely. Well, one thing I'm always trying to look for is people's movements. I think that this is a little different. One period that I didn't talk about, because I don't think it was exclusive to reading in libraries, was around the 90s and early 2000s, where we saw, like I would call it the real culture wars. Piece like that sort of battle between like maybe more personal liberties, more openness in our culture around sexuality, self-ideation, around just difference and diversity, and maybe a more puritanical bent, or maybe a Christian nationalist bent. I think that really was a war, because we were in a place of saying what are we going to be as a nation? How much freedom are we going to allow around identity in particular? I don't think this is a culture war. What this is that this is really politically motivated. I mean, for everything that I try to see, because I'm always hoping, the librarian in me, I always want to know what people think about ideas, and whether you agree or disagree, it's all the same to me, because my work and my goal is to make sure that the dialogue or even the debate can happen in a safe space. That's what libraries are. That's what they've always been, the marketplace of ideas. That's what they have to be, especially now. But what I see are people right now who see restriction of ideas as necessary for their political rise, and also necessary for them to attract the kind of support that they feel that they need. And so I see it more politically motivated than I'd like. And unfortunately, it's like a wolf in sheep clothing, because it is lodged at the grassroots level. It's lodged at the people, the soccer mom, the basketball dad, the grandparent, who wants to feel like they're involved in the school. But the reality is, it's like a wolf in sheep's clothing, because it's lodged at the grassroots level, but it is not from the grassroots level or of the grassroots level.
Yes, and if you have low literacy or lack of ability to understand that, then that's going to grow. When I sat there and listened to you and watched you speak, I got just the feeling that you are obviously so impassioned about this subject. You're like a warrior librarian, right? I'm really curious to know how did you find this as your calling? Because there are a lot of people who work in and around books, but not everybody is Tracie D. Hall. So how did you come into this calling?
Yeah, well, how many people in the audience, like, you were introduced to, like, say, libraries by somebody in your family, a big brother, sister, grandparent, mom, dad? Just raise your hand, uncle, aunt. Yeah, like most people, right? I love that. Me too. My grandmother, my grandmother and my grandfather both had low literacy. They were both Great Migration people that came to Los Angeles, where I was born, from the rural South. Like even the town that my grandparents are from still only has 1,000 people, right? Grand Cane, Louisiana. And they didn't have access to libraries. My grandmother went to only the 3rd, 6th, and 9th grade. She would ask people to read her bills to her. My grandfather went to the 4th grade. He signed his name with the X still, and then Jack, J-A-C-K, like he even put the X still, you know, with all of that. And so my grandmother, I think when she got a hold to what libraries were, that they were free, you could get books, I think she really was ambitious for her children and grandchildren that we would have, you know, a level of education and literacy that she didn't have. And so my grandmother introduced me to libraries, so I became a library user. I was a passionate library user. But later on, after graduate school, I came back to LA and I directed a shelter for unhoused youth, because I've always been really interested growing up in LA, you know, with supporting people who are unhoused. And my family, you know, before I was born, experienced housing precarity. So if you grew up in LA, you kind of feel like, you know, maybe you are one paycheck away from, you know, being unhoused. So I always have wanted to be of support. So it was when I was working with people who were unhoused that I saw, you know, that there was like sort of like long histories of generational low literacy that sort of informed poverty, that informed housing precarity. And I also saw that most people weren't using the library. They didn't know that the library was free. And so when I started introducing our clients to libraries and I saw that the librarians weren't judgmental, that they were like really helping and all of that, I was like, wow, this is like intellectual social work. You know, I'm a social worker.
Absolutely.
And, you know, yet I always was interested in scholarship and had thought about, you know, getting a PhD. And it was like, this is the happy medium. So I think the thing that led me there is family, but then also, you know, just the notions of justice. But I think that the thing that has made me so impassioned, you know, as a librarian over the last almost 3 decades is because people have entrusted me with some of the aspirations that they have for themselves, you know, and where they wanted to get using information. I've had people come and say, I don't know how to read, Ms. Hall. I've had people one time in the library, you know, I was a manager of a library branch, public library branch, and I came in really early to do some shifting before the staff came in, and I could smell that somebody had been there, you know, and I was like, I was like, they might be still here because it was, I could just, the body odor was like real present. And right there, as I went to the staff area where we would, you know, put our lunch, there was a young man named Todd, you know, that I knew. And he said, without anything, he said, Ms. Hall, if somebody wanted to get off heroin, what book would you give them? See, for me, when I'm up here talking, I'm thinking about the people for whom they're looking to information to change their lives fundamentally. And there is nothing in me that will stay silent to see the right of people to transform their lives with access to free information, to see that circumscribed or taken away. I take that personally because no one has the level of privilege to deny someone else their agency or autonomy.
So Tracie, you mentioned that your zip file of all these articles is, you know, bursting to the max.
Yeah.
And I mean, honestly, when you see, how do you feel when you see the proliferation of those headlines? And what that means is that this is happening all over the United States. It's also happening in Australia.
Yeah.
I mean, how do you feel? How does that hit you?
You know, it hits me. First of all, I ask every day, how can it happen? You know, like one of the things I think about is that what stopped the McCarthy era is that he died.
Yeah.
And
yes, okay.
Right?
Yeah,
he did.
okay.
But what if he hadn't?
Mm-hmm.
But I think about the fact that he had almost a 10-year reign.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, this is somebody who burned or banned 30,000 books. He ended the careers of many intellectuals and writers. I mean, he put people, you know, on trial. Some people left the country, never came back. Some people ended their careers because they were so afraid to be seen as free thinkers or un-American because of it. But the thing that I keep thinking about is that, some of the first instances of this modern era where we start to see state-sanctioned censorship this time started around 2017, right? And began to be many bumping off of each other, in a molecular way around 2019. So some people will say, oh yeah, this is like the third or the fourth year. But the reality is that I would argue that we're about the sixth or the seventh year, and we have the internet. Why haven't we stood up as, in the US, why haven't we taken to the streets? I mean, the right to read, that's fundamental. Where does it stop? Where does it end? We even have legislation in some states that says that if you have a banned book and you go into a place that is considered to be like a state agency, and the state has banned the book, that you could be searched, the book could be removed, you could be jailed or fined. Like when, where does that happen? I think so. There's two things. How I feel right now is that I'm incredulous. I can't believe that we haven't had a mass movement, and we need that. But then on the other hand, I am inspired and in some ways, may be comforted when I come out and I see places like this, where we have everyone here who came because they want to hear more about censorship or they want to form their own opinion. I feel like the people will prevail, but I do feel like we have to get organized. We're not organized enough, and believe me, the censors are organized.
Well, we are in a very splintered society where I think maybe the circles that are here are not necessarily interacting with the circles that are active in banning books.
Yes.
I mean, what needs to happen for this era of, the rising book banning to end so that we come out of it? Besides taking to the streets, what else needs to happen?
Well, I think we definitely need to continue to talk about it. I think that we need better journalism, in the US. First of all, I think The Guardian has done an amazing job, in the UK. I think in the US, I see the Washington Post. This couldn't have happened at a worse time because we've already seen widespread disinvestment in the press. This is when we need good journalism, right? We need journalism that helps us to understand who are these groups that are censoring books? Where are they? It took a long time for people to make the connection between the founder, one of the founders of Moms for Liberty, and the chairman of the state
They have
Republican
the same last
Party.
name, though.
Right? Yeah, but it took a long time for people to connect the dots, right? And so I think that we also need to support the press to tell these stories, especially about censorship. I think also we have to listen to young people because I think young people are the ones who are being hurt and they are talking about it. I also think that we really need to take some of our activism from the keyboard to other levels.
How do you think, with time, the passage of time, we will see this era?
Wow. I was talking earlier with one of the staff of the state library, and I was saying that, I read a lot and I think a lot about the Black Power movement. And so I asked my mom when she was living, I said, Mom, what were you doing during the civil rights era and the Black Power movement and stuff like that? And she was washing dishes and she looked at me and she said, honey, I was Motown. And I'm like, Motown? And what she meant is that, she was had the bouffant hair and she was going out to the clubs and she was getting her Black joy on. And so I always think, that, when I think about my mom, though, even though she was Motown, my mom was someone that when a little girl was hit in our neighborhood by a speeding car and a new immigrant family from Mexico, my mom had me translate some flyers into Spanish and go door to door and knock on each door until the family felt safe enough to identify themselves as the family of the little girl. And then my mom had me go and help organize a meeting that we had in a local church. And then we all went down to City Hall to as for certain types of speed bumps and other kinds of things on our street, which is a main thoroughfare. And also when we were having like gas rationing happening, my mom had me go to house and ask different people what they wanted from the grocery store on the day that our license plate would, could drive, when we could go and use the car. And so the reason why I say that is because I asked my mom what she did during this era in which people were trying to fight, for just access to the ballot and, for personal freedoms. And she answered Motown. But what was deep in my mom is a type of activism that's an everyday activism. So what I will ask of all of us is, what did we do when books were being banned? In Australia? I can tell you now, I've just left the American Library Association, and one of the things that propelled me is that I feel like this is a fight that has to happen at the grassroots level with individual citizens. And I have decided that I want to be one of those people and to help to organize, because I don't want anyone to ask me what I did when they were taking away the right to read, because the right to read for me is about liberation, because I am the grandchild of people who never learned to read. I am just 3 generations or 4 generations removed from people who weren't allowed to read. My being a librarian is a political act. And so I don't want anyone to ask me, what did you do, when they were taking away the right to read? I want to say I fought until the bitter end.
So Tracie, I want to know, because you are a librarian, but also because you very recently were the boss librarian at the ALA, the main librarian, how are librarians, at the coalface, frontline workers, coping with this pressure right now with book banning?
Yeah. I mean, first of all, people are courageous. And I know, here in Australia, there's been instances in where you have had librarians and library workers who've also been threatened, for keeping libraries open and making books available. And so I just want to say to all of you, I am in awe of the ways in which this field is standing up. I think what's happening, in the US is that we're seeing librarians and library workers be fired, have to leave their jobs just for their personal safety, especially those who are working in small towns, and many who, despite everything, that is working against them, who are just standing up for intellectual freedom, who believe, like the American Library Association espouses, that free people read freely. And so I've been really, I think, just overwhelmed with admiration, just for the courage that I have seen again and again, even when it would have been more convenient to fold. Librarians are not, and it really gives me a deep conviction, even more than I've ever had before, that libraries are indispensable to the maintenance of everyday democracy. And to see librarians going to bat, and this is a pink collar profession, mostly women, right, in the library field, especially on the front lines, not paid well like teachers, and to see people going to bat so that everyone has the opportunity to read what they want, when they want, in a way that's unfiltered or unmoderated. We have to give it up. I'm not talking about myself being a librarian, but I have a whole new level of respect for what librarians and teachers are going through just to preserve freedom of access to information,
Especially, how are the Texas and Florida librarians going?
Listen. I'm telling you, I'm getting ready to go to Florida just after I leave here, and I have already decided that I'm bringing a bag of banned books, and I'm going to make myself a billboard. No, I'm serious. I'm really going to have to do it, because I'm telling you about it. I'm going to make myself like a little board, a little sign, and I'm going to sit in the airport in different places and say, I am reading banned books, because I need to show up, can you imagine? Can you imagine? So I'm telling you, but I think they're getting hip to what's happening, because we don't want Florida to be the first to descend into the dark ages, right? Because because they're headed.
They got a problem. They got some problems.
They got some
They got some
problems.
problems. Yeah.
They got some problems.
Yeah.
Judy Blume lives in Florida.
Yes, she does, and she runs a book where she specializes in selling banned books.
That's right. That's right.
So
her part is cool. Key West.
Pockets. Okay. This is like a free kick, but is it ever okay to ban a book?
Never.
Okay, moving on.
Because, listen, there are 5 laws, like Ranganathan, the Indian information theorist, he said there's 5 laws of libraries, right? 2 are every book is reader, and another one is every reader their book, right? And so the thing is that the book that you want banned could save my life. Right. And I see that a lot, especially with LGBTQIA youth, because, I have worked with unhoused youth, and I was a young adult librarian when I first became a librarian. And I have seen young people, putting the double book, the book, there's the book.
I did that with my sexy book.
See?
Yeah.
That's what I'm saying. You probably now have like this healthy understanding that sexuality is fluid and all these other kinds of things. So the thing is that I've also seen the correlation between the rise in suicidal ideation and young people who might be isolated because they are experiencing ideation around LGBTQIA identity and feel like they're the only one, or might live in a household where that's unsafe. So for me, it's imperative that people have access to books that say, you're not the only one who has lived through whatever it is. So never, I believe, even, and I was sharing this with Paul, is that, I was a librarian when the Bell Curve book by, I think it was Dinesh De Silva, was coming out. And that book was really based on the premise of Black intellectual inferiority. Not only did I have to order the book, but I also had to help people who would come in looking at me. Can I get the Bell Curve? I had to help them find it too, because
and did you do it without comment?
Listen, I'm gonna tell you right now of something about me. You can feel my thoughts, but but I had to help people find the book, because you know what? Even if I don't agree with an idea, I have to fight for the right for that idea to be out in the world, right? I have to, because I don't believe that there's any good thing that comes from censorship. What ended up happening with Dinesh De Silva is that people read the book and they debunked his argument. And he went from being like the darling of scholarship to, I rarely ever hear his name. I don't even know what he's doing now. You have to let the people argue it out. You have to let the people suss out information and make the decisions for themselves.
Yes. I just want to give everybody out there a 90-second notice to get your questions into Slido, because we're going to move on to the audience portion of the Q&A very, very soon. And that includes all of you on the live stream over there.
But you're doing such a good job.
Oh, thank you. It's just a pleasure, and it's so easy when it's talking to someone like you. So many questions, so little time. I wonder what you think libraries will look like in a few years. So in fact, I often wonder whether the free public lending library system, if it was proposed today, whether it would even get off the ground, right? No, it wouldn't.
No.
Right? No. So let's assume that public libraries are under some threat. Because if you want to ban books, what do? You close the libraries. You pull the funding.
Yeah.
So how do we protect libraries into the future? And what would you like libraries to look like, 10, 20, 50 years into the future?
Wow, that's a good question. I'm going to say this. I'm pretty much, I've said I'm in awe of this library. But I think that one of the things I've said, and I've written about this, is that I believe that in the future, libraries will take their rightful place as the most accessible educational institution in society. And honestly, to be here, I see this library, State Library of Victoria, really moving in that direction. I don't know what this place is. I'm like, what? It's like, is it a museum?
It's a museum, it's a library. It's all sorts of things.
Or, have like a business incubator, and
it's
then like there's
place.
like this area, then there's protests on the front line.
Yeah.
I'm like, this is the place.
Yeah.
So I think that, but I also believe that I think that we are going to see. I was just in Bogota, Colombia, and I was up in the Campesino area where, the FARC and also too where farmers have been, trying to navigate space and notions of freedom. And one of the things that I've seen is that the city library is increasingly working with sort of like the elders and knowledge keepers in the community to create libraries in their homes. The people where the people, the elders that traditionally gather people and are considered to be organizers, especially community organizers, are now being outfitted with libraries in their homes so that people don't have to go that far in order to go to the library. So I do think that we'll probably see smaller units as well. But I think that, the State Library of Victoria is doing, I think, really important work. One is that I think the future is the archive, period. Because one thing that artificial intelligence can't do is that it does not have memory. And I believe that memory is going to be the most important asset for any society in the future. And I believe that librarianship is memory work. And so I do believe that we need to double down on investing in and supporting and growing and building the collective archive. And I also think that we need to ensure that access to some type of higher or post-secondary education, whether it's codified or informal, happens at libraries and continues to happen at libraries and reaches broader audiences.
Okay. Thank you.
Temple of knowledge, did you say? Yes,
right.
yes, temple of knowledge. Yeah. Okay. Listen, we came together, me and him, y'all. Listen, I am so thankful. I was just in the UAE not too long ago. One of the new libraries that is created just for young people, and it is called the House of Knowledge. And it is the goal is of connecting young people with the act of reading as a social act.
Yes.
And it's one of the most beautiful libraries I've ever seen. Everything is automated. But I'm like, how forward thinking to ensure that access to knowledge and the act of reading and engaging collectively in reading and thinking about ideas becomes something that's important for young people. I agree. I think that libraries are palaces for the people. I agree that they are temples of knowledge. Yes,
absolutely. And what a beautiful way to start the audience Q&A portion.
Y'all just better
of the
stand
night.
up.
I
Like,
know.
Nobody needs to. You just stand up. Like, that was cool.
That was great. That was great. Thank you so much. I do have some questions here, and top question right now is, what's your favorite banned book, the one that has been most formative for you?
Wow, there are a lot, but one of the books that I go back to again and again, we were actually talking about this, is Toni Morrison's The Bluest Eye. Mm-hmm. I believe that it is one of the greatest works of literature, and I got a chance to visit her archive at Princeton University not so long ago. And the thing about Toni Morrison is that, she was a single mom of 2 boys while she was writing most of those masterpieces. And she was almost like, as she says, possessed with writing, that her children would be sick or she would try to, make sure she was doing everything she needed to do to care for her children, but she wrote nonetheless. And so sometimes I have to think of her work as inspired, but that book deals with so many things. Of course, incest, what it means to be dark in a world where people of almost all races believe that to be lighter is to be more beautiful. But it also is such a haunting and beautiful treatment of mental illness. And so all of those things mean a lot to me. And I think that the fact that the book is banned overlooks the fact that it is a book that I think is truly liberatory and literally one of the greatest works of literature written by anyone, anywhere, at any time.
I agree with that. Aiden is asking, says, the door has to swing both ways. Plenty of books are filled with hate and have inspired acts of hate on a large scale. If we are to keep human rights supporting books available, we must also keep these hate-filled ones. How can we as a society and individuals keep the neutrality we need to do this? First of all, I want to ask you if you agree, and then second, what is your answer to that?
Mm-hmm. Wow. Well, I don't believe in neutrality, right? I mean, I don't even think there is a such thing. I like the word. I mean, I do. I think it's a good word. I just have never seen it.
It's elusive.
Yes. So that's like the easy part to, to say. I always joke with people. I say, we're not neutral. Anytime we act, we're, but I think you're right. I mean, I think Aiden has it. I mean, I think you have to let the people decide on the ideas. It's just like the example with the bell curve. Of course, do I have personal feelings about the validity, of that argument? Of course. But at the same time, it is my responsibility as a librarian to make that book available so that people can read it themselves, right? And I think, you're right. The door has to swing both ways. We have to allow people access. First of all, who should be needing access to information? Right? Who has the right to do that? But I think that in general, libraries and other holding institutions, the responsibility has to be freedom of access.
Sean is asking, in New South Wales, which is the state north of us here in Victoria,
Okay.
2 municipal councils have attempted to ban books in their libraries. In the face of coordinated campaigns from groups like Moms for Liberty, what strategies have you found effective to persuade local lawmakers against enacting book bans?
Go to where there are hearings. Go. Number one.
And what do you do when you get there?
What to do when you're there is if they allow public comment, right? And talk about the value of the right to read and the fact that libraries and schools should be marketplaces for ideas. The other thing that is really scaring me right now is that, especially in the US, with the Gaza conflict, is that you're seeing people, say the students can't protest and students, students have no right to speech or faculty, and that isn't I don't believe usually that universities or any type of state institution should speak. You have to allow your constituents to do that, and so to see any place that's unsafe for debate, that's problematic. But I definitely would say go to the hearings if you can, and be prepared. If someone says, well, this book, it's banned on this basis, read the book. Make sure that you've read the book and debunk the argument. Sometimes it's so super easy to do that. Get other people to go with you. Write your legislators. A lot of times there's like one person that can challenge a book and they'll be the only person. When you find out a book is challenged, get 10 people to say, this is why this book is valuable, and mean it, because I don't think, we should not use a tactic that the censors are using, which many times they're not even reading the books. So do that. You'll probably, if you do that, that's huge. Read the book. But I think, go and don't be silent. Write letters, to editors of local magazines, form groups. Like there's this group of grandparents. They wanted to go against Moms for Liberty because they were just so outraged. And so they created Grandparents for Truth. Yeah. And, grandparents are the best, right? First of all, grandparents rule in my book. But, they were like, this is crazy. And so get your own group together, but definitely don't be silent.
Next question. What about the deliberate censorship of human rights atrocities in Palestine presently? It's an open question.
Yeah, definitely. First of all, I think it's so important to acknowledge, that as we are having this conversation, the thousands of people, have and are losing their lives, and we can start with Palestine, and we can go, choose your place, right? I think the thing that is so important about the act of reading, and this is a belief that I have in general, is that I believe that there are two types of acts. I think the act of witness and the act of testimony, right? And so I think that it is so important that we read books, especially books that give us a foundation and understanding of exactly what has happened, because the amount of mis and disinformation, that I am witnessing is really profound. So I think what I hope is that a conversation that is anti-censorship, and a conversation that's hopefully lighting a fire for each of us to actually check censorship in its tracks wherever it's happening. Hopefully it's a contribution to the larger justice that we're seeking for everyone and everywhere in the world.
Another question, teachers are now fearful of setting particular texts engaging in complex issues. How do we support teachers to stand firm in their choices?
Oh my, wow, teachers, right? Underpaid, undervalued, everybody who went to school, overworked, feels that they know your job better than you. The teaching force is less diverse than it ever was before, and that's a problem, right? We're just not seeing the number of teachers of color, especially in the US, that we need, to have. I mean, we're confirming some of those stereotypes by not having, an array of people in authority teaching. We need to support teachers for sure. And I also think, teachers and librarians are experiencing shadow banning, in which, sometimes not putting books that, might have been challenged or restricted, making them available because they just don't want trouble. They don't want the problem. So I want to acknowledge that it's not always just the kind of censorship that makes it to legislation or that makes it to a hearing. It can just be someone who's saying, I'm still early in my career, or I just got to this school, or I just started in this library. I became the new library director. I don't want to cause trouble. So we're seeing a huge limitation on what people have access to in terms of information and books because of that. And teachers are caught up in that. I think we have to support teachers and make sure that teachers are not out there by themselves, that they feel like they're supported and seen and held by community.
Another question is, where do you see the role of community libraries, archives, and initiatives like the Free Black Women's Library
Come on now.
in challenging the state-sanctioned censorship within public-funded institutions?
Yeah, wow, that's a really good question. Yesterday when we were talking, about in terms of thinking about, the archive at the University of Victoria, one of the things that I heard is how the archive was formed and how it is surviving and persisting. And it is about community. And so that's one thing that I would say. I mean, there's a lot to be said. I don't want to tell that story because I'm just learning myself. But I believe that knowledge is best when it's held in community and by community. And I think I want people to use libraries more. A lot of people today think it's cool. I get a lot of young people, you're a librarian, that's so cool. And I'm like, yeah, that's cool, but use libraries.
But are you going to a library? Yes.
Go to the library. Don't let it just be something like, I think we're in a moment now where people are nostalgic about libraries. But one thing for sure is that I think the millennial generation is really using libraries, because I think for one thing, just not having always the income to buy, books and really being part of that share culture. But I want people to use libraries more and come to libraries more. Can I also say something? Please. I want people to come to more of these types of town halls or or talks or lectures, because in the building of the republic, this is how the republic is built. And I believe that in the maintenance of the republic, this is how will be maintained. That we talk about ideas, some of which are difficult. We wrangle with them. We talk about them later at home. We talk about them with them at work or with a stranger. We read more. We inquire more. We form opinions, informed opinions. And we are able now to recognize patterns and legislation, and we're ready and prepared to vote or act. Or, this is a part of civic literacy. This is a part of civic fluency. So I think what I would say is that we need to use libraries and use educational programs and platforms like this so that we are worthy of, I think, the work of continuing to build and maintain the republic, because democracy has to be maintained, and we're the ones to maintain it, and we need the tools. We need the tools, and we need the muscle to continue to do that.
We are at the end of our time, but I feel like there's just one I need to sneak in because this is a library talk. Give me 3 of your favorite book recommendations of 2023.
Ooh, that is so hard, because there is so many good books right now. That is so hard. Let me see what I will say. You know what? I'm gonna go with poetry.
Okay.
Because I think that we underread poetry, and I think that poetry offers so many guidebooks. I would say that some of the poetry right now that is kind of getting me through is I've been reading the work of 2 poets who write a lot about their experience of incarceration, because over-incarceration is another type of censorship or removal from community. Can you imagine being someplace where 3 out of every 100 people has some kind of carceral contact? So I would say Reginald Dwayne Betts and Randall Horton are 2 poets. Anything that they read, anything that they've written, I think is important. And I would also say Tracie K. Smith is a poet that deserves a lot of her work. I also had an amazing conversation with someone who is really thinking a lot about Jamaica Kincaid. And I'm not going to name, one of the greatest living writers. And I know I'm in the right place, because when you say Jamaica Kincaid, people don't say Jamaica Kincaid. I was like, what? I'm like, are you a plant? Because, that's the great, that's one of the great. So I would say anything by Jamaica Kincaid would be something. I'm reading a lot of nonfiction personally right now. So I'm reading a lot of work by Casey Lehman and, Heavy, which I think is a masterwork, and also a book of short stories. So that's what I'm up to right now. But I want to thank you for the opportunity to have this conversation with you.
I want to thank you as well. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much also for all of you. And State Library Victoria CEO Paul Duldig, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Or maybe we should go this way. Let's go this way. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Just a few final words from me. I'm Paul Duldig, the Chief Executive of the State Library Victoria. Tracie, you've filled us up with purpose. You've filled us up with hope, but also with the fight. And here at State Library, we're absolutely up for it, as I hope you can see. Thanks so much, Beverley, for being a fantastic compere this evening and putting your presence and your thought into the evening. Thanks to the Salon team and the production team here at State Library Victoria. This is the 5th of our Salon series this year, and we don't normally get to thank them and the work they've done, and it's just such an awesome series. If you haven't heard about it, it's the hottest ticket in town. It's back next year, so look out for it, the Salon series. Please give a round of applause to the team. Thank you. Also, our deep gratitude to the Helen McPherson Smith Trust, who have made the whole series possible. They've invested in the idea, they've invested in the purpose, in a 3-year program of talks, of experiences, and inspiration. And so we're very, very grateful to the Helen McPherson Smith Trust. Thank you so much. But of course, last but by no means least, Tracie, wow, thank you so much. Your time here with us has been transformative for the State Library, and Tracie's absolutely, what she says is true. She wanted to learn about Victoria. She wanted to learn about Indigenous concerns. She wanted to learn about who we were as a state, who we were as an institution, to inform her talk, and in doing so has taught us so much that we can now take forward as well. It's been incredibly inspirational. It's more than a lecture. It's been a journey that we've started, and we hope to continue with you to talk about the censorship threat in this continuum. I think has been really, really helpful. It's not just about the books. That's almost the last point in that continuum. It's actually about information and the malpractice that can occur if we're not careful, but also that thought and the reminder of the role of memory and the role of the archive, I think, is really important, particularly for a library like ours, which is steeped in archives, in 50 kilometres of storage in this building and another 50 kilometres out at Ballarat. So thank you so much, Tracie. We do have a small couple of gifts for you. We didn't give you flowers because that's kind of not going to be helpful because you're on the plane soon. So we have, and if I can tell people what we've given you, just because it's they're very special. So one is a beautiful limited edition scarf from Kinya Lurk, Indigenous owned shop in Preston. Yeah. And the other is a book called Collective Movements, which is a book about First Nations collective and creative practice, edited by Kate Ten Buren and Maya Hodge. Please enjoy. Thank you. So thanks everyone for coming. See you again next year. Thank you.